So hello, everyone. Welcome to our Industry Insights Genetic Counseling event. My name is Betsy Cahill, and I'm the Career Community Advisor for Healthcare and Science at the DePaul Career Center. Really excited to welcome you all to our event this afternoon. We will be having a moderated discussion with our guest speaker, Gabby Iverson. And then at the end of our discussion, we'll leave a good chunk of time for a Q&A with the audience as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Debbie, to share with us some information about the Career Center and our services and resources.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Let me just screen share here as well. All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some of the programs and services that we offer through the Career Center. This is our main homepage. You'll see a friendly little chat box pop up, and during 9 to 5 business hours, you can actually chat with a member of our front desk team. We also offer some synchronous and asynchronous ways to connect with our office. So you can get your resume or LinkedIn profile reviewed, even if you are too busy to meet with us. You can submit it through this link here on our website, and our peer career coaches will provide a review, and that takes about 2 to 3 business days. If you would like to meet with us in person or virtually or via phone, you can schedule a time to meet with a career advisor like Betsy or one of our student career ambassadors. You'll make that appointment through Handshake, and this website will walk you through how to schedule that appointment. You can make this appointment if you have an idea of a career path, if you're not sure, if you are exploring, if you are changing interests. We're here to talk to you about kind of wherever you are in your career journey. We're happy to talk about something specific, like here's this internship I'd like to apply to. Can you help me with my resume and cover letter? Or if you have a less specific question, like this is what I'm interested in, what do you think would be some career paths to explore? Also linked through our website is the DePaul Alumni Sharing Knowledge Network, or the Ask Network. So you can see I messaged an alum and I'm waiting for a response, but this is a way to connect with alumni volunteers who are all part of the Ask Network because they want to help current students. And you can filter by industries, topics, degree types, and connect with alumni volunteers. We also, you might have heard of the University Internship Program, or UIP classes. As of summer, they'll be known as Career and Life Design classes, or CLD. And these are classes where you can learn about and actually get academic credit for career and life planning. So that's really exciting. So we have 2 credit courses. You can review the different courses here. And then we also have courses that are connected to an internship that you have, and you can actually earn your experiential learning credit that way. Handshake is the primary job portal and career management platform that we use here at DePaul. You'll log in with your DePaul Campus Connect ID. Your homepage will look a little bit different, a little bit prettier than mine, but this is where you can go to look for different events, research employers, apply for jobs, and make connections. And we also, like I said, we post our different events. So I just wanted to call your attention to 2 upcoming events that we have. The latest in our How I Got This Job series with a public health program manager that is happening on May 17th next week. You'll learn about what she does at Lurie Children's Hospital and how she's impacting and working on community health access and issues of equity. And related, we also have a panel on health equity and technology happening in a couple weeks. And we'll hear from a DePaul professor to talk about her research in health equity and how that intersects with technology. We'll put those links in the chat so you can learn more. And I'm going to turn it back over to Betsy.
Great, thanks so much for that overview, Debbie. At this time, I am really excited to welcome our guest speaker for the day, Gabby Iverson. Gabby is a 2016 DePaul graduate who studied psychology and Arabic studies, and Gabby's currently a graduate student in genetic counseling at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Welcome, Gabby. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Gabby, to kick things off and kind of provide some context for our discussion today, I was hoping that you could start off by just sharing with us what genetic counseling is, what genetic counselors do, and what kind of settings genetic counselors work in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I probably get this question like, I don't know, once or twice a week, whenever somebody finds out what I do. And so the way that I think about genetic counseling is we really serve as guides for people and families in making genetic testing decisions. So when we think of healthcare, a lot of times we think of doctors or nurses or physician's assistants who will diagnose a problem and then provide a solution or treatment. With genetics, it's different because a lot of things are chronic or not necessarily treatable or might have different approaches to it. And sometimes it's also information that might inform management or decisions about screening more so than it might inform direct like medications or things like that. So with that, we kind of think of more non-directiveness. So this idea of providing people with information and options based on their histories, based on their own personal medical histories, their family histories, and then working with them to understand their psychosocial situation. So, what is their family dynamic? What is their ability to afford care? How do they feel about increased screenings? Those kinds of things. And then incorporate that into a decision about genetic testing. And then once they receive the genetic testing, it's also about how to navigate the post-test life. So what does it feel like to then have a positive result? How do you cope with that? How do you manage that? What specialists do we need to refer to? Those kinds of things. So that's kind of the more traditional idea of a genetic counselor. So that idea is usually kind of what you would think of as a genetic counselor who works in a clinical setting, so a hospital or like a private clinic. A lot of genetic counselors work in big teaching hospitals. A lot of the genetic counseling programs are associated with medical schools and things like that. So there's that idea. But when we think about genetic counselors as a whole, the job has spread a lot and the roles have expanded a lot. So you see a lot of genetic counselors starting in clinic and then moving to industry roles. So places like Invitae or Ambry, some of those big genetic testing labs. So people work in what is called utilization management or reviewing tests that come in to make sure they're appropriate for the patient. So still incorporating a lot of those same ideas, like making sure that this patient has been appropriately consented for testing and told what some of the ethical issues could be, what are some of the insurance implications, stuff like that. But then also making sure that for the providers who aren't genetic specialists, that they are ordering the correct testing for patients. So there's things like that. But then there's also things like medical science liaisons, who are the people, so you hear them referred to as MSLs, and they're genetic counselors who are familiar with like specific testing platforms within those companies and will kind of like a pharmaceutical rep, but not exactly, and just, being able to communicate the science with offices as new tests are developed. So there's that kind of idea. And recently there was a job posting on Embark, which I think is funny because Embark is a genetic testing company for dogs. And so one lucky genetic counselor just picked up that position. It had some pretty fun benefits, including parental leave. So I know our role is constantly expanding. There are people who work in education. So one of my faculty members is a certified genetic counselor, but she also does not practice in the clinic. So she instead is focused on adult education and works with us on our capstones, does a lot of research, stuff like that. So genetic counselors are also involved in research. Some of them work in public health, whether that's in educational settings or policy settings or in like newborn screening labs. So it's a very varied role, which is something that I really liked about it. But there's also the piece of specialties. So at this point, I start my clinical rotations this summer with a cancer rotation. So I'll be working in a cancer clinic over the summer. And so the three kind of main areas are cancer, prenatal, and pediatrics, or like general, basically. And nowadays, things are expanding so quickly with genetics and our understanding that we have all these other specialties coming out as well. So cardiology, neurology, ophthalmology, psychiatric genetic counseling is even a thing now. So it's a lot of opportunity and it's in high demand. So it's something where you might not get your first choice of where you end up, or your first choice of specialty, or you could wait for the perfect job to pop up. But there are always jobs. Most people, every single one of the people in my cohort or the cohort above me had a job offer, at least one job offer before graduation, but most of them had already taken jobs by graduation.
That's super helpful, Gabby. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to talk a little bit later about your own graduate school journey, but just picking up on what you were just sharing, can you just walk us through at a high level what the process is to become a genetic counselor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you need a bachelor's degree to start off. So people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. Most of my class or my cohort is biology majors, biochemistry majors, genetics majors. But I do know people who went into genetic counseling from theater, lots of psychology backgrounds. I'm trying to think of what some of the other ones are. I mean, people come in with English. So you do have to have a set of pretty common prerequisites. So I think it's typically a psychology class, a statistics class, like your base level bio and chemistry classes. They're not as concerned about the chemistry as the bio. Biochemistry is important, and then genetics. Some places also require organic chemistry, which is usually a prerequisite for biochemistry anyway. Some places also require calculus. It depends on the school, so it's not fully set, but those kind of baseline like set that I just kind of mentioned are helpful to have. Anatomy is also a big one, which is something I didn't take and definitely made my embryology class a little more challenging. But so you have to have some prerequisites. So and then once you have those prerequisites, what they really look for in the application process, also things that like I would recommend on the way to getting there is like crisis counseling experience or some other sort of psychosocial one-on-one kind of high emotion situations. And they also look for shadowing. So they really want you to have a good idea of what you're doing before you go into it. So then it's graduate school applications. And then it's 2-year training program that may shift over the next chunk of years. I don't think anytime soon, but genetics has grown so much that 2 years does not feel like enough. You're trained as a generalist. So even though I have a cancer rotation this summer, I also have a prenatal rotation this fall and a pediatrics rotation this fall. And so those 2 years, you are trained to take any job basically. And then it is a board certification. So you have to go to an accredited school. So it has to be accredited by, I think it's ABGC, AB. They've changed it recently where it's like separated and I can't remember which one's which. But if you go to the ABGC website, is a list of accredited schools, and then you can sit for the board exam. And the board exam is offered, I believe, in August and February. So you take your board exam. You can practice without the exam completed in a lot of states that don't have licensure. But for the states that do, sometimes they will have you just do, I don't know, admin work until you are fully certified. So that's kind of what that whole overview of that process looks like.
Perfect. That's really helpful to have that laid out. And going back to that first piece, getting the bachelor's degree, would love to hear about your own undergraduate experience, what that looked like, and how through your undergraduate experience you became interested in genetic counseling.
Yeah, so this was not my career path at all. I definitely switched at some point. So I went into school thinking I wanted to do forensic psychology or something like that, and kind of transitioned over at some point into being really interested in social psychology research and peace and justice studies and things like that. But realized at some point that academic research was not going to be the path for me. I didn't want my career to be fully based on publishing. So when I started to really realize that, it took me a while to kind of piece together what parts of my experience I wanted to incorporate into my career. So when I think about my undergrad experience and the things that really contributed to me being like, yes, genetic counseling is a good fit. Some of the things that I did in undergrad that were helpful for me, I was a Chicago quarter mentor. So the teaching experience, the mentoring experience is very important. And so having that piece, because what you're doing, and I was also a like volunteer statistics tutor for the psychology department. So that tutoring, that one-on-one experience where you're helping somebody is very much what genetic counseling feels like. You're, one-on-one with someone, helping them figure out what to do. So, and you're educating as well. So that piece of trying to help people understand the genetics piece, because genetics is hard. None of us feel like, even though we're in graduate school for genetics, it is not hard. So being able to communicate information was really helpful. I also think that I gained a lot of like crisis management skills from being a building manager at the Ray. So I did some of that. I did some team challenge facilitation there too. So it was a lot of debriefing and working with people on processing their experiences and things like that. Again, similar kind of ideas. I also took a non-science majors honors class that was through the biochemistry department, I think. That was it was called DNA and disease, I think, or something like that, or the DNA of life or something like that. And it was all about biochemistry and biology and genetics and ethics, which I thought was a really interesting piece. And so a lot of the conversations we had in that class also made me kind of interested in the genetics piece. So as I was putting all these things together, I did an internship at NYU the summer before my senior year. And so that was very research based. It was a social psychology internship. Part of the reason why I realized I didn't want social psychology research to be the sole basis of my career. So, but I knew that I loved research. I loved doing that internship. It was a great experience. It was exciting, and I enjoy the idea that research impacts people positively by providing us with more information. And so I knew I kind of wanted that to be a piece of my career as well. So with all of those things together, all of those things kind of fit into genetic counseling in different ways. So I ended up at genetic counseling because I saw an Ask Me Anything on Reddit that was all about, I think it was a bunch of NSGC genetic counselors. So the National Society of Genetic Counseling, genetic counselors were talking about their career, and I realized it really pulled in a lot of those pieces. So the education piece, the mentoring piece, the research piece, the hard science piece. So it was a lot of stuff that was really relevant to my experiences, but relevant to the experiences that for me were the most meaningful in school. So that's how I ended up pivoting and making that decision. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. And I'm curious, kind of picking up there, once genetic counseling sparked your interest and you got that little taste of it from the AMA on Reddit, what steps did you take to learn more about the field to really confirm, like, yes, this is the thing for me and this is the thing that I want to pursue?
Absolutely. So this is a really good question too, because with genetic counseling, something that people perceive, and I know we can get more into the graduate application process, but something that I think is really important to keep in mind about genetic counseling is it's a small field, and it's gotten a little bit competitive in terms of the application process. So they're really looking for people who know what genetic counseling is, understand what they're getting themselves into, and aren't looking at it as an alternative to med school or PA school or something like that. So people who know that this is the career path for them is really what they're looking for. So knowing that, I spent a long time, and changing my mind was difficult too. So I changed my mind in the very last quarter of school. You can do it, it's totally fine. But in that time, because that change was huge, I knew I wanted to be 100% sure before I threw myself into another career path. So I did a lot of like baseline internet research at first. So it was a lot of, reading the Labor Bureau statistics on, is this career going to pay what I want? Is it going to have the right amount of like education? What do I need in terms of the education? And then also like reading blogs. So a lot of like genetic counseling programs or genetic counselors have blogs. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So even just like looking up genetic counselors, and like back in 2016, it was a little less common for them to have a whole bunch of stuff about genetic counseling, but there's some fantastic podcasts now out about genetic counseling. So listen to a lot of that stuff too, and just listening to their experiences, the hard things, like the hard cases that they've dealt with, or unique career paths. So a genetic counselor was talking about working in a medical examiner's office doing cardiology counseling. And so understanding from that point of view. So I did a lot of like independent stuff before I pursued a lot of the more intensive in-person stuff. So the University of Iowa offers a bunch of opportunities for genetics education in terms of like outreach. So I don't know what she exactly is, but Colleen Campbell is a genetic counselor at the University of Iowa, and she's done a lot of work for getting the word out about genetic counseling. And so they offer some applying to genetic counseling schools, like seminars. They offer some shadowing experience. There's an internship that you can do in the summer. I did not do the internship, but my little brother did. And so like that's an exposure option. And they also offer like careers in genetics and healthcare days. And I say these things because they're not, now that everything's virtual, these things are also open to people who are not at the University of Iowa. So they're really great experiences to be able to network with genetic counselors, hear about their experiences, and talk with them about your own application, and get kind of an idea of what kinds of things they do on a daily basis. So I also went to some webinars about like what do genetic counselors do in the lab, and had those opportunities as well. So now everything's virtual. It's fantastic. It's very easy to get access to a lot of those different opportunities. And then shadowing is a big thing where COVID has made things difficult. So it's hard to get shadowing. It's something that a lot of schools really like to see, but isn't always feasible for people. Not everybody lives near a genetic counselor. Not everybody lives near a hospital that is willing to allow students come in and shadow. And so informational interviews are also a really good opportunity in terms of getting information and understanding that. So meeting with genetic counselors is kind of the current version of that. You're just having a phone call and asking them about what their experiences have been. But I got to shadow a half day in the cancer clinic at the University of Iowa. And then I was really tired by the end of all of these things. I was also doing my prerequisites and doing research and doing crisis counseling and lots of other things to pay the bills and whatnot. But because of all of that, I ended up applying for a genetic counseling assistant position at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. So that was in the laboratory, and that gave me an opportunity to meet a bunch of different genetic counselors. So I worked with like 35 different genetic counselors, got to hear about their experiences prior to working at Mayo and at work, and working at Mayo, worked very closely with them, got to do a lot of pieces of their job as well. So in having that experience, I was able to kind of understand what I want out of my genetic counseling career, and what specialties are pique my interest and stuff like that. So that was another opportunity that I pursued. Those positions are incredibly competitive, as would not be surprising because they're not that common, but they are good opportunities. And I think there are things like that. Some people also do like unpaid, I don't know, summer shadowing experiences where they might work with a single genetic counselor for the summer and just, do some paperwork for them and get to go to some of the appointments and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different ways to get exposure, but those were kind of the main ways that I got exposure to the field.
That's great. And I think definitely, really helps outline those different ways to explore genetic counseling, as well as other professions in terms of the independent online research. Love the informational interviews. That's one of my absolute favorite exploration strategies from the job experience as a genetic counseling assistant, which sounds incredible. And so with that, sounds like those experiences were really beneficial in helping you to confirm, yes, genetic counseling is for me. And talk us through kind of the next steps after that, particularly leading into your graduate school journey.
Yes. So no one's ever going to tell you applying to graduate school is fun. It's not a fun experience. It was rough. I did it in the middle of the pandemic. Luckily for me, they had like the scrambly application process the spring before me. So I applied in the fall of 2020 and interviewed in the spring. So the way that genetic counseling works is it's a match process. So if anybody's ever thought of residency in terms of med school, where you get a bunch of interviews and then you rank your preferences, genetic counseling school is the same. So they did that because there are 50-ish programs and too many applicants every year. Lots of people apply multiple times, and that is a-okay. I think it's always an opportunity to take some more time. I spent a long time in between undergrad and grad school working on stuff. And so I think I was pretty ready at one point, but I think I also spent a long time with graduate school applications. Like, my little thought, like throwing it out there, not entirely related, but is make sure you're very ready for going to grad school before you apply. Don't just like hurdle yourself in because you feel like you should, because it is an endeavor. So people are applying to more schools now. It used to be that we had interviews in person and it was like a big interview weekend. That's not a thing anymore. So now they're virtual interviews. It's usually a day or half day. There's usually a meet and greet with students. So I applied to 10 schools. You also have to apply to the match. There are some good options in terms of like waivers for those fees. So it can be a little daunting though, and it is something that I would recommend factoring into your financial situation if you're doing okay, because I think when it was all said and done, I think I spent about $800 applying to those 10 schools with the match as well. And the GRE. So GRE is not required for a good portion of schools at this point. We at UNCG are GRE optional. So, and I don't think we're going to continue. I don't think it's going to be a requirement that we continue to have. It seems like it's being phased out of a lot of programs because it's not necessarily the best predictor of success, and it's expensive and cost prohibitive for a lot of people. And so basically transcripts, GRE, you write a couple of essays. Everywhere has a different requirement. There's no common app as of right now. So we're hoping that will change. Lots of people doing capstone or thesis research on the desire for that to be a thing, because filling out 10 applications was not very much fun. And so I wrote a bunch of essays about why genetic counseling and what inspired me and why do I care and that sort of thing. And so all of those are due around like November, December, January. Some of them are sometimes due in February. Most of them are due in December and January. And so spent the fall applying. You need 3 letters of recommendation at least. I think Colorado is the only place that I saw that requires 4. And those prerequisites. So in terms of if this becomes something that is interesting to any of you listening to this, I would highly recommend just like making a spreadsheet or however you like to organize your information and writing down what the requirements for each school are, and then just kind of going through and checking that off. Some places I didn't apply to because I didn't meet their prerequisite and I had no desire to take calculus for one school. And so, yes, that narrowed down my opportunities, but also it just was not going to be something that was feasible. And so that's something that I would recommend. Is super helpful, and it was a good way of kind of keeping track of where I was at in the process. I also just like spent a long time and like the website that has the list of accredited programs, I basically made a spreadsheet out of that and then just would like cross off programs based on certain things. So like cost, location, I mean, like I don't want to live there, or I don't think I can afford to live there, places that whose mission statements didn't feel completely aligned with my own, places that didn't offer the rotations I was looking for, offered rotations that required me to move. I have 2 cats. I do not want to move again. I want to stay in my apartment for 2 years and be done with that. And so it's a lot of exploring their websites, and I would say that took probably a good chunk of time. So that's something where things change a lot. So if you're looking 2 years out, it might shift a little bit. But it's good to kind of keep that in mind if that's something that you're interested in. Like, where would you want to live in the country? How much do you think you can manage to spend? Some places offer different match tracks. So part of the reason I ended up at UNCG is because they offer different scholarship match tracks. So what I matched to was UNCG's GA, so graduate assistantship track. So I got in-state tuition in North Carolina for this year, and then also got a stipend on top of that. So some programs offer that, some programs don't. So like those kinds of things are the way that I narrowed down where I was applying. And then in January and February, and hopefully not too late into March, but sometimes March, that's when you get notifications of interviews, and it is the most stressful process of my entire, I feel like grad school is stressful, but like that couple of months was a lot. So there's lots of resources. If people want to ask me about like that process, there's a whole Discord server dedicated to supporting prospective applicants. And so that's a good place to go. For some people, it's more anxiety inducing. I spent a long time on there watching like the notifications come in. You do your interviews. They're typically, you interview with like 4 or 5 people at each school, and they ask you, I don't know, a variety of different kinds of questions, genetic counseling or not genetic counseling related. And you usually have an opportunity to talk with current students, which absolutely 100%, no matter what program you go to, any opportunity that you ever have to talk to current students is super, super valuable. So some people don't manage to attend those. Like I would highly prioritize that, because you can learn a lot about a program and how we interact. My cohort is 7 people right now. So these are small programs. I think the biggest one is like 25 or 28 or something like that. But for the most part, they're right around like, I would say 6 to 12 people. And so you want to make sure that it's got like the vibe that you want. So there's a lot of that too. You're interviewing the school as well, because you're ranking them as well. And then match day is usually like 3/4 through April. You get your match result and you move. So for most people, so it's exciting. It is a hard process. I would say things that I didn't do that would have been helpful were actually like have genetic counselors review my stuff. I'm a procrastinator. I wait until the last minute for everything. So that wasn't great, but I had so much application and writing experience at that point, because I had applied to so many jobs, that I wasn't quite as worried as I probably should have been. But have, you know, if you have a chance, like make those connections with genetic counselors and have them review your materials. I would say also something that I didn't necessarily weigh as much, and part of it was just pandemic, like made things difficult. I didn't necessarily keep in touch with people from DePaul because I switched my career path. I just didn't think about letters of recommendation as closely as I should have. So I ended up having somebody write it for me from the University of Iowa. And of course I had like one of my bosses at Mayo, and one of the people that I worked with in crisis counseling write them. So like I had options, but nowadays it can be harder, I think, to make those connections with professors. So there's nothing bad about like reaching out every 6 months, year, or whatever, and just saying like, hey, I'm thinking about doing graduate applications coming up. Your class was really meaningful to me for this, this, and this. And I was wondering if, you would consider writing me a letter of recommendation in the future, or, stuff like that, because it was a nightmare for me to figure that out. Because I had been out of school for 2.5 years. So I hadn't really been talking to people that I was in class with. So that participation is really important as well. Yeah, I think that's kind of the overview of the application process. Definitely get other people involved. Let your friends read your materials to proofread, get started early. Usually they open in August and September. As far as like the applications go. So the actual grad applications too, like the actual application portal, I was so ready to be so frustrated, but like a lot of them took me like 15 minutes to fill out, aside from like all of the supplemental, like tailoring my CV to what they wanted, and like the personal statements and things like that. So those short and easy, just get them done early, and then you can work on the rest of your materials and you don't have to worry about it last minute like I did. So those are good. My recommendations, don't be like me, get it done early. It will be way less stressful. You can have people review your materials. Oh, and then as far as personal statements go, I took a class at DePaul about like writing personal statements for like prestigious scholarships like a million years ago. I think it was with Professor Stolley, but it was a really helpful class in just thinking about the different ways that you talk about experience. So one thing that I would highly recommend is when you do something that is at all meaningful for you, write down what it was and why, and just keep that in a Word document somewhere, and like just use it as like your brain dump of things. No matter what you end up doing in the future, it's so helpful when you're writing like personal statements. It's so helpful when writing a CV. It's so helpful when writing cover letters, when you can go back and be like, which experiences have I had that can apply to this specific thing? So that was a lot of what I had done too, is I went back to that Word document, looked through all of those things, because it's easy to forget the stuff that you do during school. What, Vincentian service day experience did you have that was meaningful? What, job did you have that was working in an ice cream shop? Like, what were the applicable skills that you got from that? So like those kinds of things I think help too, so that you don't end up scrambling at the last minute. I know that's a lot of information.
Those are amazing pro tips.
We just got through application season, so I'm like, it's on the brain.
And now that you're through the application process, what's the experience in grad school been like so far?
It was a hard transition. I'm not going to lie about that. So going from working for 2.5 years and having free time that was my own, and like being done at the end of the day and not having to think about homework, like transitioning back into that, not very much fun. Grad school is hard. Genetic counseling programs are hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are reasons why there are those prerequisites. It's not because they're trying to get you to jump through stupid hoops. It's because you need that information. You don't need to remember all of it, but you need to be able to like go back into your brain and be like, okay, I've heard this term before. It's a lot of work. For me personally, so when you're looking at schools in anything, like looking up the structure is really important. So some genetic counseling programs require like you to do rotations right away. And I am not that kind of person. I want to be handheld all the way through it. And then I want to feel like I'm like gently being like pushed into the deep end, as opposed to like being kicked off the high dive. So we don't start rotations until the second year. So this first year has been didactic work, and it's been a lot. I'm in 7 classes both semesters, which is not typical for most grad programs as far as I know. Usually you're doing some research too. So I'm working on my capstone right now. And so it's a lot of things. Your cohort is absolutely your best like resource. We lean on each other so much. It's fantastic. And you're working with genetic counselors who are all trained in counseling. So I think most programs have great faculty who are very flexible and can work with you and understand that it's hard. And so as much as it was hard, I've really enjoyed it. I've had a great time with my cohort. I've had a great time learning. I've had some really great experiences. We did some standardized patients this last semester. And so being able to like start to use those skills and watch yourself be able to grow that way is so cool, I guess. And to like build up those skills semester after semester, I think the difference between undergrad and grad school too, in a lot of ways, and not always. There's certain things where I'm like, I'm never going to use this again. But in undergrad, there's a lot of like making you a well-rounded person. It's a more holistic approach. Whereas in grad school, like they're teaching you the stuff that you need to know to be able to function as a genetic counselor in the world. So it's also nice to see how all of my classes kind of mesh together and know that most of what I'm learning is stuff that I very well will probably use in most of my work moving forward, which is nice because it feels meaningful. And because there's a lot of overlap. So it's not just like, oh, I've never heard that before. It's like, okay, we talked about that last semester in the testing area. Now we're talking about more in the psychosocial sense. So that's been really cool as well, getting to see a lot of different genetic counselors and their process and how they do their counseling, and learn how to develop your own style of counseling is really cool. But it's been a great experience and a hard experience. And so this semester for me has really been like, okay, last semester was rough. I was still figuring out a lot about my own self and what I wanted. And it's a lot of imposter syndrome, which happens a lot for grad students, happens a lot for undergrads, like grad schools, like imposter syndrome central. And this semester has been a lot of like stepping back from that and saying, okay, I need to do better with my self-care. How do I set boundaries? Boundaries are so important in grad school. How do I set boundaries for myself? How do I set these expectations where I understand that I am a human, I'm not a machine. So even though all of these things are expected of me, my program also understands that like there are limits to what I can do as a person. And so like sometimes you're turning in what is not like the most perfect piece of work that you've ever done, because you just have to do it so that you can move on to the next assignment. And so learning how to negotiate all of that, like prioritizing working out, or just having like certain nights of the week where I'm like, I am not doing work that night. I need to sleep or play video games or hang out with my boyfriend or whatever else. So I think that's been a big learning experience, has really affected how I felt about grad school. And so this semester I'm like walking out of it. It was a tough semester, but I feel a lot better than I did last semester. So I think getting into those habits early is good. You know, being able to say no and also find ways to let go of needing to be perfectionist, because we find a lot of perfectionism in this field. So, you know, being able to let go of those things and decouple the idea that your productivity defines your worth and all of that stuff. So it's been a lot of self-discovery, I think, at the same time as learning a lot of things that I'm really interested in. And I think that's been really valuable too, because it's very, very much encouraged by a lot of program directors. So we have assignments that are specifically geared towards like, what's your self-care plan for this semester? And like, how did you keep that up? How didn't you keep that up? What worked? What didn't? And so they do know it's important, and it's important in any helping profession, but it's good things to get started on, honestly, even before you get to grad school, in any job, in any grad school, in any, you know, relationship. Yeah. Just like I think Debbie threw in the chat, or Betsy threw in the chat, like that's really important. So that's made all the difference, but I've had a great time so far, and I'm excited for my rotations to start now too.
Gabby, this has been incredibly insightful. I'm so grateful to you for sharing with us not only about the genetic counseling field broadly, but also about your firsthand experience. We have about 10 minutes left, and so I want to give the opportunity to open things up to our audience. For anyone who has questions for Gabby, you're welcome to unmute yourself. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat. If you want to send something anonymously, you can privately chat it to me and I will ask it on your behalf.
I'll say too, I'm an open book in terms of like, well, clearly in terms of my experiences and stuff. So if you have questions about like, I don't know, changing your mind about things, or any piece of that too, it doesn't have to be just genetic counseling related, or, you know, trying out different career paths, because I did a lot of stuff in between too. So if you have questions about that, happy to answer that stuff too. And if not, that's cool. I know you all are at the end of the year. Or getting there. Not quite.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
My name is Amarise. Nice to meet you. That was all very insightful. Thank you for sharing. But I was just gonna ask, like, was there like anything like anyone in your cohort said like stood out like about their application, or like when they were like applying, or like classes that they took that like I don't know if I'm making any sense, but like
Oh,
for
you're-
example, I was thinking of adding like a minor in bioethics. Like would that like help as well during the application process?
Absolutely. So I'll answer that in kind of two parts. Yes, I think that's a great thing to aim for. I think bioethics, I think Northwestern, I believe, and maybe Columbia both offer opportunities for like graduate minors or like double major, I don't know what exactly, concentration, something else, like where you have to do some additional work in bioethics. So it is very closely related to this field. So I had questions about bioethics in some of my interviews. So it would absolutely be a fantastic thing to add, I think, if it's something that you're interested in. So that's kind of the second piece, is when on that server, so on that Discord server, which is, if people aren't familiar with Discord, it's like a forum, you make a group, and then there's like a bunch of different forums, basically people can share information on there. And one of the things that very frequently comes up are people worried that they're not going to get into grad school because they weren't able to secure a genetic counseling assistant position. And they're like, well, I'm just going to be a camp counselor for the summer, but like, that's not genetics related. But the thing is, you know, everything that you do in life cannot revolve around just your job. So there's going to be things that you are passionate about that are outside of genetics that are absolutely 100% applicable to this career path. So like, everybody's like, I'm going to be a camp counselor over the summer. Like, that gives you some good experience. Maybe some people work with disabled children. So like, that's a fantastic experience, especially if you end up wanting to go into pediatrics, or even just, doesn't matter. Like, even if you're a camp counselor for a bunch of teenagers, like having that experience interacting and the responsibilities and the, you know, managing schedules and things like that, like all of those things are applicable. So I would say also do the things that you like. Don't like shove yourself into a box, no matter what, for grad school. Do not shove yourself into a box that you think you have to fit, because really what people look for in application, I'm not on an admissions committee, but what people are looking for on applications is really like, what are you passionate about? How can you apply that to genetic counseling? And how can that passion come through in your work as a genetic counselor? So, you know, I don't know. I know people have talked about having conversations about being an adoption counselor at an animal shelter, and how that was meaningful for them, and then helped them in different ways understand what the process of genetic counseling might look like in terms of figuring out what's, you know, making decisions and figuring out what's a good fit. And so I think if it's something that's interesting to you, absolutely. If it's feasible too, and I mean, some of the other parts of that is like, you also have to do what's feasible for you. So there's also a lot of people who are like, I have this unpaid opportunity to shadow this genetic counselor all summer, but I also have this full-time job opportunity, and it's not genetic counseling related, but I will be working as a secretary in a hospital setting. Like, make the money, like take the money. Don't put yourself in a bad financial position. Like, yes, it would be great if you had the flexibility, but at the same time, like, it is okay to do what you need to do for yourself. Just be making that effort to figure out, like, how can I tie this back? And some of that might just be like sitting down with, you know, the career center, fantastic at that, and talking to them about transferable skills. What can I pull out of the experiences that I've had that can be applied? What can I pull out of these things that were really meaningful to me in a personal way that can be professionally applied? So I think that's a really great minor to have. I wish I would have done something like that. I think it's super interesting. I think also do what is feasible. If that's financially an option, go for it. I think it would be a great opportunity for you to learn about a lot of the things that will probably come up. Genetics is full of ethical dilemmas right now. So I think it's a good direction, but also with anything in terms of like applications and what's going to make you the best candidate, like do that baseline and then do what is feasible and best for you, and then figure out from there how that makes you unique and makes you somebody who's going to be a good support person in the genetic testing process.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
And I love that emphasis, Gabby, on transferable skills. It's something that we talk about in the Career Center so much. And I feel like so many of my conversations with students and alums revolve around this question of like, oh, I want to go into this career, but I haven't done anything related. And it's like, no, actually, you've done like so many things that when you think about it and dive in deeper are super related. And so I think it's really great to hear that from someone like yourself who's been through this journey, because I think it is so critically important. And oh my goodness, I realized that we are just about at the end of the hour. I just want to launch a quick poll for our attendees. We're always looking to get feedback on our events. And Gabby, thank you so much again for joining us for this. It has been so informative. I know I have learned a lot, again, in terms of the genetic counseling profession specifically, but also around what it looks like to pivot in terms of a career direction and navigating that exploration process and grad school and so forth. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, always happy to share, always happy to talk about this field. It's something that I'm obviously very passionate about and very excited about. So happy to share and happy to be available. I'll have to touch base with you all because I don't know if I'm actually a part of the Ask Network, but I'm more than happy to be a part of it too if people want to reach out and chat more about genetic counseling.
Amazing. I'll send you over the information.
Sounds good.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much again. Gabby, thanks again to you. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a great rest of the spring quarter.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good rest of your semester.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.